Good day to all of you. For today, let's learn the Japanese literature. But first, let me introduce myself to you. I am Pamela Olaires from BSE 301A English. Under Japanese literature, we only have three learning contents. First is about the background of Japan. Second is about the Japanese culture, and the third one is about the Japanese literature itself. So we have 7 categories under the background of Japan. It is about its identification, location, geography, demography, linguistic affiliation, main religions, and writing system. Let's discuss the first identification, which is its name Japan. So the Japanese names Nihon and Nippon are alternative readings of written characters that mean origin of the sun. That is why it is also known as the Land of the Rising Sun. So why is it called the Land of the Rising Sun? It is simply because this country was so close to where the sun rises. The second identification is its flag. The Japanese flag was made up of a red circle which symbolizes the sun against a white background. Their flag is also known as Hanomaru in Japanese, which means circle of the sun. So just like what was mentioned earlier, the sun rises over the sea near Japan. And that is the reason why that image became the inspiration for the design of their flag. Let's now have the category of location. So there are 4 major islands in Japan. First is the Hokkaido, second is the Honshu, third is the Shikoku, and the fourth one is the Kyushu. In addition, there are 6,852 minor islands in this country. Now, when it comes to its geography, there are 4 seasons in one year. First is the spring, which can be experienced from March to May. Second is the summer, which is from June to August. Third is the autumn, which is from September to November. Lastly is the winter, which is from December to February. So it is said that the temperature and climate that we'll be experiencing in Japan is significantly depending on the season. For example, it is winter. Then there is a low temperature and the climate is cold. However, the southern island group of Okinawa from Ryukyu Islands is geographically, historically, and culturally distinct. It only means that the people in there might be experiencing different season and even cultural pattern from other islands in Japan. Now, when it talks about demography, according to UN data, Japan has a population of over 126 million as of mid-year 2020. It became the 10th largest population in the world last 2018, and it has the world's highest life expectancy. When we say expectancy, this is the expected amount or number of years of a person's life based on statistical probability. Let's now have the category of linguistic affiliation. So the country's official and predominant language is Japanese Nihongo. When we say predominant, it means being most frequent or commonly used. And that is really noticeable that Japanese Nihongo is their predominant language because it is the first language by 122 million people and the second language by 1 million people in Japan. Let's now discuss the main religions in Japan. Number 1 is Shinto, which represents the phrase, the way of God. It is the indigenous faith or native religion of Japanese people since 500 BC. Moreover, it is a polytheistic religion wherein people are praising any natural objects like mountains, river, water, rocks, and other things. So they are doing that for they believe that the sacred spirits took the forms of this kind of objects or things. In simple words, they praise based on animism. Number 2, they have Buddhism. So this is a religion found by Siddhartha Gautama, which is also known as Buddha. And that name Buddha means the awakening one. In relation to that name, Buddhist people awakened or influenced others to focus more on their personal spiritual development or to the true nature of life. That's why they don't worship any gods or deities. Let's have the last category under the background of Japan, which is the writing system of Japan. So before, Japanese people don't have letters until Chinese people introduced their letters in the 2nd and 3rd century. After then, the Japanese started using Chinese letters, and now, let's briefly discuss their modern writing system. So let's have first the kanji, which represents ideographs from Chinese characters. To make it understandable, let's have an example. So just like here in the Philippines, we have the alibata, which are also written characters. The only difference is that kanji was adopted from other country, while alibata was originally made by the ancient Filipino people. Second is kana, which contains pair of syllabaries. When we say syllabaries, it is a phonetic writing system which is consisting of symbols that represent syllables. Furthermore, each syllable is often made up of a consonant plus a vowel. So we can say that kana is closer to alibata characters since in a symbol, there is one consonant and one vowel which is equal to one syllable. So for example, we have the letters M plus A. If we join them together, we will be having the syllable ma. And ma plus ma is equal to one symbol. So that is an example of kana. Under kana, there are two characters. Number 1 is hiragana, which represents native Japanese words. To make it understandable, these are the luma at malalalim na salita in Filipino. Let's now proceed to number 2, which is katakana. So it represents foreign or borrowed words. That is why this written character is considered as imported one. So we can compare it to the Spanish words that we have adopted from the Spaniards and we are still using up until now. So that's all for the background of Japan. I hope you've learned something about this learning content. Let's make our knowledge travel to the second learning content, which is the Japanese culture. So just like other countries, Japan has its own past and history when it comes to its styles, buildings, foods, clothing, and more. However, under their culture, we will only be discussing about their clothing, their food in daily life, and the symbolism that they have in their country. Let's first discuss the category of clothing. So there are typically two types of clothing that the Japanese people wear. First type is the Japanese traditional clothing, which is known as wafuku in Japanese. So these are the kimonos that we are all familiar with. Also, it is identified as the all-year kimono, the feminine costume, and the national attire of Japanese people. Now, there are two formal Japanese traditional clothes. Number 1 is Furisode Kimono. So its design is very colorful, bright, and rich with patterns. And it is worn by young unmarried women. Number 2 is Tomasode, which has a solid design and the colors are more subtle. So unlike Furisode, it is worn by married and older women only. The similarities between Furisode and Tomasode is that they are both kimonos and they are mostly worn for some social functions like ceremonies. Since traditional clothing is just part of the past, it is not worn as often as it was before. However, to show respect to the culture and history, Japanese people are still wearing it whenever there is a special occasion like birthday, date, New Year, Christmas, and more. So the second type is Western clothing, which is known yofuku in Japanese. So these are the clothes worn often in day-to-day life. The best examples of it are suit for men and dress for women. Now the third type is called yukata. So these are the summer casual kimonos, which is worn by both men and women. This kimono type can be accompanied by wooden sandals called cheta and obi belt around the waist. Since it is for summer seasons, it has a lightweight cotton with very brightly colored designs on it, and it is mostly worn for summer festivals and religious ceremonies. The second category talks about the Japanese food in daily life. So the notions of traditional Japanese cuisine are important elements of their cultural identity. When we say cuisine, it refers to the style or method of cooking of a particular country, region, or establishment. Actually, having the cuisine is very helpful for the country to be recognized by other people, especially the foreign ones. Moreover, their eating habits have been reshaped by changes in domestic life, and since Japanese families eat fewer meals together, then sophisticated kitchen appliances have transformed the domestic cooking. Regarding with this statement, it is not a new thing for us to know that the country Japan has a very advanced technology which also affect the way they cook and eat. Also, they have several kinds of noodles, but there are only three given here, which are udon, soba, and ramen. These noodles are cheap and very popular for light meals. As an island nation, the Japanese people are proud of their seafood. So there are a variety of fish, squid, octopus, eel, and shellfish appear in all kinds of dishes from sushi to tempura. So we can notice that they are having the highest life expectancy because of the healthy foods that they are eating in daily life. In addition, it is said that a careful preparation and meticulous presentation are crucial elements of Japanese cuisine. That is because for them, food is an art form and even the simplest dishes are often prepared by chefs who have trained for many years. Let's now go deeply to the main content of this discussion, which is the Japanese literature. Under this learning content, we will be discussing the history, the Japanese literature forms, and the Japanese theater forms. Let's have first the history of Japanese literature. So long ago, only poems and odes to the gods were composed before the art of writing was known in Japan. It is sad to say that only fragments of this literature or writings have survived. But during the first centuries of writing in Japan, the spoken language and written language were identical. When we say identical, it means similar in every detail or things are exactly alike. It is maybe because through the use of written language and spoken language, literature is passed from one generation to another. Now, Japanese literature is one of the major bodies of Oriental literature. Also, it is one of the major literatures of the world comparable to English literature when it comes to age and variety. The term Oriental means coming from or associated with Eastern Asia. Moreover, Japanese literature is divided into four main periods. Number 1 is the ancient period, 2 is the classical period, 3 is the medieval period, and 4 is the modern period. Under the modern period, there are also four sub-periods, and these are the Edo period, the Meiji period, the post-war Japan, and the contemporary literature. But the only topics that we will be discussing is about the Edo period and the Meiji period. Let's discuss the first period, which is the ancient literature. It is until 794, and it is the time when Japanese people don't have their own writing system. That is the reason why the Chinese characters were further adopted by them. So yes, it's just like what we've discussed earlier about their writing system. Now let's explore the two of the oldest Japanese literature in this period. First is the Kojiki, which refers to the records of ancient matter. So it is considered as the oldest book of Japanese history and the oldest text of any kind from Japan. The work begins about the creation of the world and about the gods and goddesses of their mythology. All in all, it is made up of facts about ancient Japan which are compiled by the court scholar Onoyasumaru in 712 CE. Second is the Nihongo or Nihonshoki, which refers to the chronicles of Japan. So it manifested the history of Japan in the field of poetry, and it showed the profound and strong influence of Chinese people during that time. Also, it is one of the earliest and most important sources of Japanese mythology because it provides most of the myths and legends from the early periods of Japanese history. In addition, this Japanese literature was completed by Prince Tonari in 720. So let's have Urashi Mataro as one of the earliest examples of ancient Japanese literature. So it is a story of a man named Urashi Mataro who saved the tortured turtle by a group of children. He didn't know that the turtle is the emperor of the sea's daughter who wants to see him to thank him. That's why one day, the turtle gave him magical gills and brought him to the bottom of the sea. Taro stayed there for 3 days, but soon he wished to go back to their village and see his aging mother. Before he left, the princess gave him a mysterious box called Tamate Bako. It is said that it will protect him from harm, but he should not open it. When he came back to their village, her mother and other people he knew were gone. Lately, he discovered that it has been 300 years since the day he left from the village. Because of sadness, he unconsciously opened the mysterious box, which caused him to suddenly become an aged man. From the sea, the princess said, "I told you not to open that box. In it was your old age." So that's the summary of the story Urashi Mataro, which is the earliest example of a story involving time traveling. Now let's have the second period, which is the classical literature. So in this period, the different literature were produced during Heian period or during the golden era of art and literature in Japan. So the following are some important writings under the classical literature. Number 1 is Manyoshu, which refers to the collection of myriad leaves. The term myriad means a unit of 10,000. In addition, it is the oldest collection of Japanese poetry, which was collected and assembled by Otomo no Yamamochi in 800. So the poems within this collection inspired many later poets or authors who copied the styles, imagery, and even the phrases of the great masters. Let's proceed to number 2, which is the Taketori Monogatari. So this is a 10th century Japanese narrative and known as the first monogatari among existing works. When we say monogatari, it means tale or narrative in Japanese. In other information, this is considered as the oldest tale in Japan and oldest extant Japanese prose narrative. In addition, this literature contains very different elements of stories. But in spite of that characteristic, this literature has reached a high degree of perfection and have been valued in the early period of literature history. Let's have the number 3, which is the Eroha poem. So it refers to pangram, which is made of hiragana. When we say Eroha, it means the basics in Japanese, which is comparable to the term the ABCs in English. And when we say pangram, it refers to sentence or verse that contains all the letters of alphabet. Number 4 is the Janji Munagatari, or the Tale of Janji in English. So it is written in 11th century by the court lady named Murasaki Shikibu. It is a preeminent masterpiece of Heian fiction. When we say preeminent, it means surpassing all others, or in Filipino, it means nakahihigit sa lahat. In addition, it is the oldest novel and possibly the first novel in the world literature. To be specific, it is the first example of a fiction novel wherein it describes the life and love affairs of Prince Genji. It is also noted for its rich characterization and vivid descriptions of life in the Japanese imperial court. Number 5 is the Konjaco Nagatarishu, which refers to the collection of tales now past. So it is the monumental collection of popular stories in Japan. When we say monumental, it means great in importance, extent, or size. To be specific, it is the collection of over 1,000 stories in 31 volumes, which is mostly emphasizing the Buddhist themes. Furthermore, it is compiled during the 12th century and it has 3 geographic categories. And these are the Tales of India, the Tales of China, and the Tales of Japan. Now let's have the third period, which is the medieval literature from 1185 to 1603. Just for a brief background, Japan experienced many civil wars which led to the development of a warrior class and to the subsequent tales, histories, and related stories about the wars. That is the reason why the literature from this period is notable for its insights into life and death, simple lifestyles, and redemption through killing or seppuku in Japanese. The term seppuku is a form of ritual suicide which was originated by Japan's ancient samurai warrior class. Let's proceed to one of the famous tales in this period way back 1371, and that is the tale of Haiky. So it is an epic account of the struggle between two clans for control of Japan at the end of 12th century. In contrast, it contains many themes of samurai or military, and these are the ethics and values, loyalty, bravery, strong leadership, self-sacrifice unto death, and the great deeds of honor and duty. During this period, there are also other notable genres which are renga and no. On one hand, renga is a genre of Japanese collaborative poetry that has alternating stanzas of 5-7-5 and 7-7 mora or sound of units per line, and these are linked in succession by multiple poets. On the other hand, no is a traditional Japanese mass drama or theater with dance and song evolved from Shinto rites. Later on, we will be discussing more about this. Let's now proceed to the fourth period, which is the modern literature from 1603 to 1945. So under this, let's have the first sub-period, which is the Edo period or Tokugawa period from 1603 to 1868. So the literature in this period pertains to the capital of Japan, moved from Kyoto to Edo, which is known as Tokyo today. This period contains the forms of popular drama developed, which later evoke into Kabuki. To be specific, the written works in this period are about traveling or journey from Kyoto to Edo. The term Kabuki is a form of traditional Japanese drama with highly stylized song, mime, and dance. Later, we will discuss more about this. Furthermore, a literary piece entitled Okono Hosumichi in 1972 is written by Matsubasho, which means narrow road to or of the interior. So it is a travel diary wherein the poet or the author inspired many people to follow in his steps and trace his journey for themselves. In one of its memorable passages, Basho stated that every day is a journey and the journey itself home. So they have Chikamatsu Monzaimon, which is a Kabuki dramatist and known for being the Shakespeare of Japan. During this period, many genres of literature made their debut or made their first appearance on public. That's why the rising literacy rate came along with the growing population of townspeople. And because of that, a development of lending libraries also happened. So the genres which are accompanied by colorful woodcut prints are horror, crime stories, morality stories, comedy, and even pornography. More about this, the importation of Chinese vernacular fiction is acknowledged since it gave the greatest outside influence on the development of early modern Japanese fiction. Let's now discuss the second sub-period, which is the Meiji Period. During this time, the reopening of Japan to the West happened. Also, it became the period of rapid industrialization or production. Moreover, it is the time when the introduction of European literature came in Japan. So the European people brought free verse into the poetic repertoire. When we say repertoire, it means supply of play, dance, or piece that a company or a person is prepared to perform. In addition, it became widely used longer terms in embodying new intellectual themes. On one hand, young Japanese prose writers and dramatists have struggled with a whole galaxy or set of new ideas and artistic schools. On the other hand, novelists are the ones who first assimilate or absorb some of the new concepts successfully. That may be because the writing skills of novelists were greater than the young prose writers and dramatists during that time. Moreover, the new colloquial literature presented the I-novel, which is a literature with some unusual protagonist. It is also a literary genre in Japanese literature, which is used to describe a type of confessional literature. So its story is pertaining to the events in the author's life. The Meiji period is divided into two parts. First is the early Meiji, which has the genre of Enlightenment literature. Second is the mid-Meiji, which has 7 genres. Number 1 is the realism, which represents the reality in the world. Number 2 is the classicism, which has an emphasis on form, simplicity, proportion, clarity of structure, perfection, restrained emotion, and intellectual. Number 3 is the romanticism, which has an emphasis on emotion, individualism, and glorification of all the past and nature. Number 4 is the naturalism, which is a type of extreme realism that suggested the roles of family, social conditions, and environment in shaping human character. Number 5 is the neo-romanticism, which is a reaction against naturalism. So it emphasizes that everybody could choose the language they wanted to speak and focus on mood and state of mind. Number 6 is the humanism, which refers to self-fulfilling faith and humanist philosophy and way of life. And number 7 is the neo-realism, which deals to the war and social problems. Now, we are about to discuss the Japanese literature forms. So if you remember what was mentioned earlier, one of the only written works before are poems, and that will be the focus of our discussion this time. Let's have first the Kanji. So it is known as Han poetry in Japanese, that means traditional Chinese poetry. Also, it refers to the works by Japanese poets written in classical Chinese and in a style of verse. So it is divided into two. Number 1 is kotashi, which refers to all kanji that has an old form. So it don't have a definite format and there is no restriction about how to compose a poem, tone patterns, and meter. Number 2 is kintashi, which is a modern style poetry or produced based on a new style. So it has strict rules about how to compose a poem, tone patterns, and meter. Let's have the second, which is waka. So the term waka literally means Japanese poem in Japanese. This style of poem captures emotions than to explain or define them because it is a more specific and restrictive sense of poetry. Also, it encompasses a number of different styles, but there are only two main styles here. Number 1 is tanka, which means short poem. Now it is consisting of 5 lines wherein the first and third line have 5 syllables, while the remaining lines have 7 syllables. All in all, a tanka should have 31 syllables. Number 2 is choka, which is the opposite of tanka because it means long poem. It is of indefinite length and formed of alternating lines of 5 and 7 syllables. Also, it has an extra 7-syllable line in the ending. Many choka have been lost, and the shortest of those still existing are 7 lines long, and the longest have 150 lines. The third one is what we are all familiar with, which is haiku. So it is the shortest poetry in the world, which derived from the Japanese word hoku that means starting verse. It is typically written on the subject of nature, and it has 17 syllables in all. The 17 syllables are divided into 3 lines of 5, 7, and 5 syllables. The fourth literature form is not included in the poetry. However, it is one of the popular and modern styles of writing and art that the Japanese people are having today, and that is manga. So it comes from the Japanese words man, which means whimsical or impromptu. When we say whimsical, it refers to sudden and uncountable changes of mood and behavior. And ga, which simply means pictures. In simple words, it pertains to the works which uses pictures and few words to describe a changeable mood or behavior of a story. So Japanese manga is a genre of literature which is consisting comics or graphic novels. It is typically printed in black and white and often have adult themes. So the history of manga is said to originate from scrolls way back to the 12th century. And it is also believed that it represents the right to left reading style. In addition, the manga artist is called mangaka. Now, let's go down to the last part of this discussion, which are the Japanese theater forms. So drama or theater is one of the favorite forms of amusement. Now, the popular plays are generally about history and tradition, or deals with the lives and adventures of gods and heroes. So the theater forms are included in this discussion since it is also part of literature. So the first one is no play, which is the oldest surviving form of Japanese theater. It is also the national theater of Japan, which was originally reserved for the nobility. Legend says that no dance was invented by gods. Moreover, this theater form is combined with music, dance, and acting to communicate Buddhist themes. Also, it often retells the tale of Janji or the tale of Haiky. The second one is the Georgie Replay, which is a very popular play or doll theater. The puppets used in this theater form are beautifully made and lifelike in size. And while playing, the strings are expertly manipulated and the dialogue is interpreted in realistic way. The third theater form is called Kabuki. So it comes from the Japanese word ka, which means song, bu means dance, and ki means skill. Another thing, this theater form is play for masses. Also, it is a classical theater in Japan, which is known for its elaborate costumes and stylized performances. So the dramatic postures and gestures in kabuki is called kata. Furthermore, it is used in political discourse because it shows less intellectual and more realistic, even sensational themes. So that's the end of our discussion for today. I hope you've learned a lot in this video. Again, I am Pamela Olaires from BSE 301A English. Thank you for listening. Sayonara!